Carlisle Cullen never knew the life of an ordinary man. He was born in 1640 in London, at a time when the plague ravaged entire neighborhoods and death was a constant shadow over the city. His mother died when he was a child, and his father, a rigid-minded religious fanatic, instilled in him early on the belief that the world was full of demons. But not just the demons of disease and poverty. To his father, the real threat lurked in the darkness. Witches, werewolves, vampires, cursed creatures that had to be eradicated. Carlisle grew up in that world, surrounded by sermons about purifying fire and public executions of those accused of making pacts with the devil. And when his father grew old, the responsibility to continue his mission fell upon him. But Carlisle was never like his father. He didn't want to kill. He didn't see the world in black and white. When he led his first hunt against a nest of vampires hiding in the city's underground, he felt more fear than fury. But his father had raised him not to question, so they attacked. And Carlisle was the first to fall. The bite wasn't immediate. It wasn't like the stories whispered in church. It was a flash of movement, a sharp pain, and then fire. Carlisle didn't die, but he was no longer human. When he woke up, he knew it before he even opened his eyes. The world was different. The sounds, the smells, the clarity of the night, and above all, the thirst, a voracious hunger that burned his throat, demanding that he kill. But he didn't. He couldn't. Instead of giving in, he fled. He crawled through the sewers, hid from humans, waiting to die. But vampires don't starve to death, so he learned to resist. He discovered that the scent of animal blood didn't burn as much as human blood. And one day, when he could no longer bear it, he tasted his first prey. It wasn't easy, it wasn't natural, but it worked. And at that moment, Carlisle did something no other vampire had tried before. He decided he wouldn't be a monster. He wandered through Europe for years, always alone, always avoiding his own kind. But he couldn't stay in the shadows forever. The human world still called to him. The desire to belong, to be something more than a predator, never left him. So he studied, he learned. And when he discovered that he could control his thirst, that he could live among humans without killing them, he became a doctor. Centuries passed. He saw kingdoms fall and empires rise. He witnessed the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and in every era, he helped. He became a shadow in hospitals and battlefields, a vampire who saved lives instead of taking them, a myth among his own kind. Carlisle Cullen, the vampire who did not hunt. But his existence remained lonely, because no matter how many years passed, he was still alone, until he found Edward, and then Esme, Rosalie, Emmett, Alice, and Jasper. Little by little, his family grew. But although Carlisle had found his purpose, his faith in the goodness of vampires had never truly been tested. Not until the Volturi summoned him to Volterra, and he saw the other side of his own kind. He saw what vampires could truly be. He saw Aro, and in that moment, he knew his struggle had only just begun. Carlisle walked through the halls of Volterra with the same serene control with which he faced life. But inside, unease was growing. The Volturi had summoned him. It was not an invitation, but a summons. Aro had always shown a particular interest in him. His lifestyle, his choice to abstain from human blood, his purpose as a doctor, everything Carlisle represented went against vampire nature. And yet, Aro found him fascinating, not out of admiration, but because Carlisle was an anomaly, and Aro did not tolerate anomalies. When he entered the throne room, the atmosphere was heavy. Caius sat with his usual expression of eternal disdain. Marcus barely lifted his gaze, lost in his endless apathy. But Aro smiled as if Carlisle were an old friend. "Carlisle, my dear Carlisle, what a pleasure to see you again." Carlisle inclined his head in respect. Aro, the leader of the Volturi, descended gracefully from his throne, moving with the elegance of a being who had never known fragility. He extended a hand. Carlisle did not take it. Always so reserved, Aro clicked his tongue as if disappointed. "You know I only wish to understand you better." Carlisle held his gaze firmly. "Why am I here?" Aro sighed, as if his patience was being tested. "Carlisle, you and I have existed for centuries. We both know that vampires were not made to live as you do. What you attempt is admirable, no doubt, but it is not sustainable." Carlisle did not respond. He knew what would come next. Aro always spoke with the sweetness of a teacher instructing a child. He always made his words seem reasonable, but there was always a trap. Your way of life is an illusion, Aro continued, pacing slowly through the room. You can resist the thirst all you want, but in the end, you are still what you are. Caius intervened then, his voice full of contempt. I see no difference between a vampire who refuses to hunt humans and one who drives a stake through his own heart. In both cases, it is a denial of one's nature. Carlisle remained silent. He did not take the bait. Aro smiled at his lack of response. Carlisle, I have been patient. I have let your experiment continue without interference. Carlisle raised an eyebrow. Interference? Aro clasped his hands behind his back. You see, our world needs stability, rules, order, and you defy that order. Caius spoke harshly. We do not allow anarchy, Carlisle, and what you have done, what you continue to do with your family, is a danger to our kind. Carlisle felt a shadow of anger, but suppressed it. My family is not a danger. Aro tilted his head with a smile. Not yet. Carlisle felt the weight of that word. Yet. He knew what this meant. The Volturi had not summoned him just to warn him. They had called him to give him an ultimatum. We want you to join us, Aro finally said. Silence fell over the room. Carlisle did not blink. You know my answer. Aro smiled, but this time there was no kindness in his expression. I do, but you will not always be able to refuse me. Caius narrowed his eyes. Patience has a limit, Carlisle. Carlisle observed their faces carefully, and at that moment, he understood the truth. This was not an invitation. It was a threat. He returned home with a sense of unease he could not ignore. When he entered the Cullen mansion, Esme was the first to greet him, her worried eyes searching his face for answers. Edward, leaning against the wall, watched him seriously. What did they say? Carlisle slowly removed his coat, thinking about his words. They are watching us. Esme took his hand. Are we in danger? Carlisle looked at her tenderly. Not now. Rosalie, who had been listening from the staircase, crossed her arms. But we will be, Carlisle exhaled. If the Volturi decide we are a threat, they will not hesitate to destroy us. The silence that followed was overwhelming. Alice and Jasper exchanged glances. Edward clenched his jaw. Emmett tightened his fists. For the first time in centuries, Carlisle felt fear. Because the truth was undeniable. The Volturi never left loose ends, and Carlisle had spent too much time defying their authority. Sooner or later, they would come for them, and when they did, Carlisle knew that words alone would not stop them, because the Volturi did not grant second chances.